The X-Tension 350 is a fully redirective guardrail terminal end for use on the end of steel guardrail barrier systems. The X-Tension 350 is a highly engineered safety device made up of a relatively small number of parts. Before starting installation, make sure that you are familiar with the makeup of the system by reading the installation manual. Installers are wearing all the required safety clothing, including high visibility vests, steel cap footwear, gloves, hard hats, and safety glasses. Locate underground services before installing any posts. Only authorised personnel are to operate any machinery. When using overhead machinery, take care to avoid any overhead hazards. Before installing, make sure you have identified and laid out all materials required for the X-Tension 350. Please follow the steps 1 to 3 in the installation manual for instructions on how to install the X-Tension 350 posts. Bolt the block out to post 3. Put the other blockouts in place, but don't bolt them. Install the bottom of post 1, making sure it is offset to compensate for the lack of a blockout. Using the ground strut as a template, install the soil anchor in the correct location. The soil anchor should not protrude more than 100 mm from ground level. Install the top of post 1 into the bottom anchor, ensuring the post bolt notches are at the top and facing the soil anchor. Fix this into place with an M16 by 200 hex bolt complete with nut and washer. Make sure you do not over-tighten this bolt. Install rail 3 as per a standard panel, with post 6 at the centre of the rail and blockouts between the rail and posts. Place the cable anchor bracket at the back of the rail, at the join between rail 3 and 4 and at post 7. The 2 boxes on the cable bracket are on the impact head of the splice joint. Attach the rails to the post and blockout with a post bolt and join with standard splice bolts. Place rails 1 and 2 on the ground in front of where they will be installed to the posts. Remove the angle bar and the 2 M20 by 40 bolts. Bolt the slider bracket to the end of rail 2 at the location of post 3 using 4 standard splice bolts. The angle bar end needs to be closest to the impact head end. On rail 1, slide the slider panel onto the end of the rail at the post 3 location and bolt into place using 4 standard splice bolts. Push these bolts through from the inside so the nut is on the traffic face of the rail. Ensure that the curved reinforced end of the slider panel sits at the end of the rail. Push rail 2 into rail 1 at the slider panel end, overlapping the rails as per a standard splice joint. You can use a crowbar to help line up the post bolts. Reattach the angle bar to the slider bracket on the back side of the slider panel. Lift the complete rail 1 and 2 assembly with slider panel and bracket into place and bolt to posts 2 and 4 using standard post bolts through the blockout. Do not bolt the rail to post 3. Splice rail 2 and 3 with the 8 special yellow head shear bolts, putting the washer and nut on the inside of the rail. Place the impact head at the end of rail 1 and attach using 8 standard splice bolts with the nuts on the traffic face. A hint to make this install easier is to place the bottom 2 bolts first and then use a crowbar to lever the rail snug onto the rail. Bolt head and rail 1 to post 1 using an M16 by 50 guardrail post bolt. Use a 50 by 50 square washer under the nut on the inside of the post. Other workers need to stand clear to avoid being caught in moving cables. Push the cable under the steel strap on the ground strut and forward into the hole at the top of the anchor. The cable that will be sitting at the bottom of the rail closest to the ground has half the thread protruding through the anchor. Push the cable through the anchor enough that the nut can be wound at least 2 turns past the end of the thread. Install the friction plate in the top of the impact head with the adjustment hole up. Take the bottom cable closest to the road and pass the cable through the bottom hole of the impact head. Then pass it through the friction plate and out the backside of the impact head. Now thread the cable down the backside of the rail, following the bottom trough of the rail, and attach it to the bottom box on the cable bracket at post 7. Repeat this process with the other cable, pushing it through the top hole in the impact head and along the top trough of the rail. Place the nuts and washers on the cables at the cable bracket end, making sure the nuts are only tightened a few turns. Do not tighten the cables at this stage or the friction plate will not turn. Put a long crowbar through the hole at the top of the friction plate and turn it in the slot as far as it'll go. Then tighten the 4 M20 by 75 bolts on the side of the impact head to lock the friction plate into position. Only tighten the cables using the nuts at the cable bracket at post 7. Do not tighten the cable nuts at the front of the soil anchor. Tighten the cables until they are taut, resting in the backside of the rails with no visible sag between the posts. There is no torque requirement for the cables. Push the nosing into place on the front of the impact head. Attach by using the nylon push rivets. To protect pedestrians and cyclists from exposed splice bolt nuts and threads, fit nut protectors on the impact head and the slider panel. For further information, please refer to the Extension 350 installation manual.